Welcome to the morning, last day of March, March 31, 2025. And we're talking about 2028 this morning because Donald Trump is talking about 2028. So he called Kristen Welker, the moderator of Meet the Press, over the weekend, and they talked about a bunch of things. But one of the things they talked about is the storyline that will not die. Will Donald Trump try to stay in office beyond his second term, which ends January 20th, 2029. Okay, let's just go with what Trump said first, and then I'm going to break it down. So, Trump said, quote, "A lot of people want me to do it, but my thinking is, we have a long way to go. I'm focused on the current." I'm reading from my phone. Then later, Welker said she'd heard him joke about serving a third term a number of times, and Trump then said this, quote, no, I'm not joking. I'm not joking. He also said, when Welker said one possibility could be JD Vance gets elected president, Trump runs as VP, and then Vance allows him to be president, that's an option. But there are other options. Okay, so what do we make of all this? Look, I've been on the record as saying the 22nd Amendment is very clear. You can only be elected to 2 terms as president. I know there are a legal scholar or two out there who say, well, it's open interpretation. It really isn't, to my mind. Basically, every legal scholar I've read and seen and talked to suggests it's an open and shut case. So, what does this mean? Well, let's start with, yes, Donald Trump absolutely wants to be president beyond 2028. I've said that many times. I will continue to say that. He has clear authoritarian leanings. He believes himself to be a great man of history. He doesn't really care that much about the rules, never has. And so all of those things, when you add them up, yes, if you said tomorrow, look, President Trump, you can be president until you die, he would say, absolutely. He is not the guy who's going to say, well, I think the founders put it in the Constitution. He's not that guy. Never has been, never will be. My struggle with the 2028 and beyond debate is that, as I said, constitutionally, it's pretty clear there's not a lot of wiggle room that suggests that Trump can still be president beyond early 2029. So the way that it would happen, I think, are basically 3 ways. One is the way that Kristen Welker suggested, which is that JD Vance, the current vice president, runs for president in 2028, under the understanding that if he is elected, Donald Trump would be his vice president. Donald Trump would effectively be the president. That's route 1. Does JD Vance want to do that? It seems odd that he would, but okay, that's route 1. Route 2 is Trump says, I'm just staying in office and challenge it. And they challenge it, and it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, which is, yes, a 6-3 conservative majority, says, yeah, actually, he can still be president. 22nd Amendment's not important. At which point, we don't live in a democracy anymore, but, that is a path, right? I don't think the Supreme Court's going to do that. I don't think John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett in particular, and maybe all the conservatives, but certainly not the two of them, are going to vote for something like that. But that's route 2. And then route 3 is Donald Trump says, I'm staying in office. It goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, well, the 22nd Amendment says you can't stay in office. And he says, I don't care. I control the military. I'm staying. At which point, again, we don't have a democracy, right? We have an authoritarian rule at that point. If you can ignore the rule of law and you can ignore the Constitution, you can ignore the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court capitulates to you, we don't really have a democracy. So in 2 out of 3 of those scenarios, we don't really have a democracy anymore. And I don't think that's where we are, March 31st, 2025. I don't think that's where we are, but I will say there is no question that Donald Trump is going to push the envelope here. When you give quotes like saying, it's not a joke, I'm not joking, a lot of people are asking me to do it. You have members of Congress already sponsoring things to try to suspend the 22nd Amendment so that Trump can stay in office and it's, 2025. When you have all those things happening, there is no question that as we get closer to it, I think he is going to get more serious about it. I continue to believe that ultimately the fact that the Constitution says what the Constitution says makes it virtually impossible for him to stay on as president unless he ignores what I would expect would be an adverse Supreme Court ruling on him staying in office, or he convinces JD Vance and the rest of the Republican Party that, yes, he should be the vice president, but really the de facto president again. Could it happen? I mean, I guess it could. I guess it's the whole where there's a will, there's a way. That's the argument for it, because there's clearly a will for it. He wants this to happen. He is making very clear that he wants it to happen. He talked about it in his first term. He's talked about it now in his second term. It's moved from, oh, I'm joking, to I'm not joking. And, this is a step in that direction. I continue to think the Constitution will hold, that the Supreme Court will hold. Could he go the VP route? He could, constitutionally. Look, I still think it is far less than a 50-50 possibility, but it is definitely not a 0% possibility that he at least attempts to stay through some means. He wants to be president for life. There is no question about that. Now the issue is, how will he attempt to make it happen, and will the institutions hold? We've got 3 years to talk about it, and I think we're going to be talking about it for the next 3 years. Thanks as always for watching and checking me out. Be well, and make sure you subscribe.